In 1960, a French book pointed at an ancient city in Pakistan and made a claim built for the atomic age. Mohenjo-Daro had been destroyed by a nuclear blast 4,000 years ago. The supposed proof came in 3 images: skeletons in the streets, glass-like ruins, and ancient weapons that burned like the sun. Powerful, but there is a problem hidden in the dates. The nuclear story was built after the excavations, not recorded by them. Open the site reports, and the picture changes. The trail bends away from catastrophe and toward something stranger, a modern myth attaching itself to a real, extraordinary ruin. So before deciding what happened at Mohenjo-Daro, we need to ask where the nuclear story came from, and whether its 3 pieces of evidence survive contact with the ground. The scanned page puts us back where the myth should have begun, in the ground. If a city died in one catastrophic event, the layers should carry that memory. Bodies in context, damage lining up, destruction appearing across the site at the same moment. Then come the materials themselves: bones, minerals, kilns, pottery, soil, and every claim about heat or radiation. After that, the paper trail has to be separated from the older traditions it borrows from. Ancient literature, later interpretation, and the modern books that helped move this story into the world. None of this makes Mohenjo-Daro less mysterious. It makes the mystery harder to fake. To see why, we have to leave the atomic image behind for a moment and look at the city beside the Indus, long before anyone imagined atomic war. The map brings us to Sindh, in present-day Pakistan, beside the Indus River, not to a lost battlefield, but to one of the great urban experiments of the ancient world. Mohenjo-Daro rose during the urban peak of the Indus Valley civilization, roughly between 2600 and 1900 BCE, within a wider network across parts of what are now Pakistan, northwest India, and beyond. It was not a cluster of huts waiting to be explained by legend. It was a planned city. Its streets were laid out in ordered blocks. Brick houses opened onto lanes. Many homes had wells, bathing areas, and drains carrying wastewater into covered channels beneath the streets. Long before many famous ancient cities had comparable public sanitation, Mohenjo-Daro had turned water management into infrastructure. The city also made things. Archaeologists have found bead-making, shellwork, pottery, weights, seals, and craft production tied to trade routes across the Indus world and toward regions as far away as Mesopotamia. Small carved seals, often marked with animals and short lines of symbols, show a writing system, but the Indus script remains undeciphered. That silence is the opening. We do not have a royal chronicle explaining who ruled the city, what its people called it, or how they understood its decline. We have streets, drains, walls, artifacts, bones, flood deposits, and excavators' notes. When a place is spectacular but its own records remain locked, later writers can pour almost anything into the gap. War, curses, lost technology, cosmic punishment. The first obligation is still to the ground. So when archaeologists opened this city layer by layer, what did they actually record? In the excavation record, the skeleton story does not explode. It shrinks into something smaller, stranger, and more complicated. In the popular version, Mohenjo-Daro is frozen at the instant of catastrophe. Bodies everywhere. People struck down in streets. An entire population erased in one flash. The published excavation record gives a different image. The number most often cited is about 37 human skeletons or partial remains, spread across a very large site, found in different contexts, not thousands of victims sealed inside one moment. That difference matters because a mass disaster leaves a pattern. Bodies would cluster in the same horizon. Debris would belong to the same destruction event. Trauma would repeat across many individuals. Damaged architecture and human remains would point to the same episode. At Mohenjo-Daro, the remains appear through the excavation history rather than as one simultaneous layer. Some were found in streets or rooms, and that should make us pause. A strange context can signal abandonment, later disturbance, erosion, flooding, poor preservation, or deaths after urban life had begun to unravel. Without one destruction layer tying them together, the bodies cannot carry the weight the nuclear story places on them. Kenneth A. R. Kennedy's work on Indus skeletal remains sharpens the point. His analysis did not support a massacre at Mohenjo-Daro, and the record does not show the repeated signatures expected from blast trauma, verified thermal injury from an extreme flash of heat, or abnormal radiation. So the remains stay important, but they change meaning. They are not a frozen forensic snapshot of nuclear destruction. They are a thin, scattered, context-dependent record from a city whose final centuries were messy, layered, and partly preserved. The next alleged clue is darker and more cinematic, the glass-like material said to prove impossible heat. The next clue is not a blast, it is a surface. Dark, fused, sometimes glossy enough for the word glass to do a lot of work. Glassy brick, fused clay, vitrified ruins. To a modern viewer, that texture can feel futuristic, as if the city's skin had been flash-melted by a force beyond ordinary fire. Glassiness, though, is not a verdict. It is a process. Clay, sand, ash, and mineral-rich debris can turn glassy when heated strongly enough in the right local conditions. Ancient cities had places built to concentrate heat: pottery kilns, brick firing areas, metalworking zones, hearths, and refuse pits where craft waste could collect. Heat does not have to consume a whole city. It can work inside a chamber, against a wall, or within a small mound, leaving slag, fused surfaces, and glossy fragments. That is the scale question the nuclear story blurs. A vitrified fragment by itself does not say why it melted. Its meaning comes from where it was found, what minerals it contains, whether nearby materials show the same exposure, and whether the pattern spreads across the settlement in a way that matches the proposed event. At Mohenjo-Daro, the documented picture does not show an entire urban landscape fused by a sudden blast. The glass-like material cited in the myth fits better with localized high-temperature activity, especially kiln-related or pottery-related debris. That belongs in the world of an industrial city where people fired ceramics, worked materials, and produced heat in controlled spaces. A nuclear event would be expected to leave a much broader signature, a destruction horizon across the site, widespread thermal alteration on exposed surfaces, blast damage, abnormal radiation evidence tied to the same event, and casualties locked into one catastrophic moment. Those signatures are not documented at Mohenjo-Daro. The glass claim, then, does not rescue the skeleton claim. It shows the same move in another material, a real archaeological trace, lifted out of scale, stripped of context, and asked to carry a story it cannot support. Once the ground stops carrying the story, the trail moves toward the bookshelves of the 20th century. Then the red thread leaves the trench and lands on a bookshelf. That is where the story changes fast. In the excavation volumes, Mohenjo-Daro is a difficult archaeological site, layered, eroded, partly damaged by water, and full of gaps researchers have had to handle carefully. In popular books of the 20th century, those gaps became openings for a louder interpretation. The first key stop is 1960, The Morning of the Magicians, by Louis Pauwels and Jacques Bergier. It was not an excavation report, and it did not present Mohenjo-Daro in the cautious language of field archaeology. It belonged to a speculative, literary world, fascinated by hidden knowledge, lost civilizations, and the idea that the ancient past might contain technologies modern people had only recently learned to fear. Then, in 1979, David Davenport and Ettore Vincenti pushed the claim further in Atomic Destruction in 2000. BC ancient descriptions of devastating weapons, the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, scattered human remains, and heat-altered material were arranged into a single atomic narrative. That order matters. The nuclear story does not rise cleanly out of Marshall's excavation records, then get confirmed by physical anthropology and material analysis. It moves the other way. Modern writers begin with a 20th century image of destruction, then look backward for ancient scenes that can be made to resemble it. This does not mean every reader was gullible or every writer acted in bad faith. The mid-20th century had made nuclear destruction newly imaginable. Once modern cities could be destroyed in a flash, older stories of blinding weapons and burned landscapes started to feel familiar. But familiarity is not evidence. A cultural echo does not put bodies, brick, and debris into one destruction layer. The paper trail gives a different origin point for the myth. Not a buried reactor or radioactive streets, but a meeting between archaeological uncertainty and atomic age imagination. That leads to the third pillar of the claim, the ancient texts themselves. The ancient texts are not a footnote. They are the part that demands the most care. Sanskrit epic traditions contain some of the most powerful images of war and cosmic violence in world literature: divine weapons, blinding radiance, burning force, devastation beyond ordinary human scale. For a reader living after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it is easy to understand why those images can feel modern. Place a manuscript on one side of the screen and a Mohenjo-Daro site map on the other, and the gap becomes visible. A modern fear can echo inside an ancient image without turning that image into evidence from the ground. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana are vast religious, literary, and cultural works, shaped through long periods of oral transmission, poetic expansion, regional retelling, and manuscript history. They are not field reports from excavation trenches at Mohenjo-Daro. They do not give us a sealed archaeological context, a datable destruction layer, or a chain of physical evidence from text to ruin. Start with the timeline. Mohenjo-Daro's urban decline belongs to the Bronze Age Indus world, long before the later textual forms in which these epic traditions were written down and transmitted. Older memories may live inside epic literature, but one dramatic passage cannot separate memory, theology, poetry, and historical event. Then look at how the writing works. Epic language magnifies moral and cosmic stakes. A weapon that shines like the sun is doing religious and literary work before it is doing forensic work. Reading it as a technical description of a nuclear device imports a 20th century category into a much older symbolic world. The map adds another check. The nuclear version often jumps from a Sanskrit passage to Mohenjo-Daro as if the connection were established. The city, however, sits in the Indus archaeological record, with its own material history, undeciphered script, and no readable local archive naming such an event. A respectful reading does not flatten the epics into modern weapons manuals or dismiss them as fantasy. It lets them remain enduring texts with religious, literary, and cultural force, while asking archaeology to answer archaeological questions. Once those lines are separated, the atomic story loses its last pillar. What remains is not a replacement disaster. It is a system under pressure, with a city inside it. Mohenjo-Daro sat beside the Indus, and that was both its strength and its vulnerability. Rivers fed fields, moved goods, and linked cities across a wide urban world. But rivers also shifted, flooded, abandoned channels, and forced people to rebuild around water that did not behave like a line on a modern map. Archaeologists have found signs that flooding mattered at Mohenjo-Daro. Layers of silt and repeated rebuilding suggest a city that knew water could arrive violently, cover streets, and leave people repairing brickwork again and again. That does not mean one flood ended everything. It means the city may have lived for generations with a recurring problem built into its geography. Beyond the city, the wider Indus world was changing too. Climate records point to weakening monsoon patterns in parts of the region. Some river systems appear to have lost reliability. Settlements shifted. Long-distance trade networks, including links toward Mesopotamia, became less stable. A city built on coordination, grain, craft production, drainage, exchange, administration, could suffer not because one wall fell, but because many connections thinned at once. That kind of decline is harder to film. No single flash, no clean ending. It looks like maintenance delayed, neighborhoods reorganized, trade routes fading, families moving toward places where water and work were more dependable. This is where the nuclear myth does damage. It replaces the intelligence of the Indus people and the fragility of the world they managed with a spectacle imported from our own age. It makes the past feel mysterious by making it less specific. The real mystery is more demanding. Mohenjo-Daro belonged to a civilization with standardized weights, seals, planned streets, and an administrative system we can see but still cannot read. The river lines fade, the trade routes thin, the seals remain silent. With the myth stripped away, we can return to the evidence board one last time. When the evidence board comes back into view, the myth gets quieter. The skeletons do not form a city-wide death layer, and the studies do not show blast trauma, thermal injury, or abnormal radiation. The glass-like material is not a footprint of atomic fire. It is localized high-heat debris, the kind a complex craft city could produce without any weapon from the modern imagination. The ancient texts remain powerful as literature and tradition, but they do not line up as excavation records for Mohenjo-Daro. That leaves a more human question. Why was the nuclear story so tempting? In the 20th century, after humans had learned what atomic weapons could do, ruins like these became a screen for modern fear. We projected our own ending backward onto a city whose own words we still cannot read. Mohenjo-Daro does not need that projection to be astonishing. Its streets were planned, its drains were engineered, its seals crossed distances, its people built an urban world that lasted for centuries, then changed in ways we can trace only in fragments. Rivers shifting, floods returning, trade weakening, households moving on. The past rarely gives answers cleanly. It gives clues, a map, a seal, a wall, a silence. Follow those clues carefully, and the real mystery is not whether Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed by a nuclear blast. It is how such a city rose, how it held together for so long, and what its unread signs might one day tell us about the moment it began to fade.